Call to order the special meeting of the Board of Finance and Board of Selectmen to go over our open space. I'd like to have the Pledge of Allegiance, if we could stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First on the agenda, we have the long-range plan for maintenance and stewardship. Mary, would you like to enlighten us?
Yep. Thanks to the Board of Finance for calling this joint special meeting and the Board of Selectmen. Also want to thank Parks and Rec Commission. We have Dave Bush, Chair of the Commission, and Jerry Wetchen, who are here. Also the Open Space Committee, and Don Rieger's here from the Open Space Committee. So I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their summer schedules and the public for being here to support a wonderful opportunity to shift from acquisition of land use to stewardship of the town's open space and land use. So we're really entering a very important phase in the history of the town, and we have a great opportunity now to start a legacy in taking care of the open space that we have all acquired with the support of our taxpayers. We currently have a total of 7,057 acres, which is 32.2% of the town's land area is open space. So we're going to have first, of that amount, 2,907 acres are managed by the town of Simsbury. About 45% of all properties categorized as open space are now under town control. What's really brought this joint meeting to the forefront is that the voters of Simsbury overwhelmingly supported the final acquisition of Ethel Walker Woods. And with that comes a tremendous opportunity to really talk about how we're going to use that land, but also a tremendous stress about how we're going to manage that land. So I thought tonight we would just quickly go over what we're asking for, what our plan is. Jeff, I'm going to call on Jeff Shea first, our town engineer, and he's going to talk to you, give you some context about where our open space is, what the total open space looks like, how the Ethel Walker piece fits in with our recent acquisition. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Toner, and Jerry's going to talk about the challenges that the acquisition of Ethel Walker is bringing to the town, and why we think there's some real short-term opportunities to manage that open space, and also some other opportunities to partner with some volunteers to talk about how we partner with the Keep the Woods organization that's still active. And then finally, we're going to talk about what we think in terms of a budgeting need in the short term and the long term over the next 5 years that we see that will really focus on the stewardship plan. So feel free to stop us if you have any questions, but we thought we'd just start with an overview of the open space, just so everyone may not be on the same understanding. Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. I brought a couple of boards here tonight just to give everyone a general overview. Hopefully you can see it. Of the open space in the town of Simsbury. All the green shaded parcels are actually open space or conservation land. They're owned by the town, the Metropolitan District Commission, McLean's, the state of Connecticut. So there's a lot of various ownerships of this land. The interesting thing about the Ethel Walker piece, again, is it kind of completes a contiguous corridor along the western portion of town. It's about 1,700 acres. Some of it's owned by the town, some by the state, and some conservation easements, which are noted by these cross-hatched areas here. As Mary said, it's about 32% of the total area of town, which is pretty outstanding in terms of open space. The Ethel Walker parcel, again, is just noted down here. It's approximately 431 acres, a fairly significant piece. It includes some various habitats. It's part of an aquifer protection area. So it has a lot of benefits for the environment, and also provides some continuity to other town land off to the west. In general, the Ethel Walker parcel, just to explain what we control here. The pink line actually shows the entire border where we have either fee simple ownership or will have it,
Could you hold that up just a little bit, because that
I'm sorry.
kind of in the way. I don't know if anyone else can. There we go.
Maybe I'll put it right here.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
So the pink is the overall piece. These parcels to the west are parcels that have been acquired previously with a combination of grant funding and town funding. The highlighted area in yellow is actually a conservation easement to the town of Simsbury. It's still owned by the Ethel Walker School, but again, no development.
Is that the land you
there.
can see by the road, the lower?
Bushy Hill.
This is Bushy Hill. I'm sorry, I should have oriented you. This is Bushy Hill. This is north. This is Town Forest Road over here. So again, the missing piece right now is parcel C, which is the one that was recently approved in this red cross-hatched area. It's about 40 to 45 acres, depending on which document you read. Certainly we'll get that nailed down. But again, that kind of closes the loop here in terms of the continuity of the piece, and provides again the connectivity to the west. I think with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry. He'll talk about a little bit about the general financial needs for open space in town.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe you have a cover memo in front of you from myself to the Board of Selectmen regarding needs for funding of open space, and as a result of the Farrows Farm property sale.
That is June 12th?
That's correct, yeah. The request for $450 to be placed in the open space fund to fund the following projects. First is the forest management plans, which are currently being prepared now for 4 separate parcels in town. This actually is a continuation of a program that was done started about 25 years ago, ran for about 5 or 6 years. With the depression of the timber market, it was discontinued. But we had, I think, a lot of success with it at the time, and we're in the process now. Funding has been secured for those plans that are being prepared by a consulting forester. The only funding that we'd be requesting would be for the initial timber harvesting work, the preparation of putting it out to bid, of supervising the bids, and after that it would be a totally self-sustaining program. And that's the model that it was run under previously, so that funds, whether it be for improvements to the parcel or education programs, would not be expended without revenue that's already been secured.
So the $6,000, that's the $6,000 or to get?
That's correct. That would be the seed money to get us started, and then that would be the end of it.
What would it take in as far as revenues for the?
Just going back to when, again, we're going back, 25 years. The initial parcel that we'll look at harvesting again, which is the Onion Mountain Park, and there's a total of about 160 acres out there. We did about 3 separate harvests. I think the last one was about 1991 or 92. So we would go to, hit those first. At the time, last time they were in the vicinity of $22,000 to $28,000 for each one. And with that, there are some expenses in terms of the consulting forester doing the, supervising the actual harvest itself, because it's important to us that it's done properly, and that the property is not damaged in any way. So, but that's the harvest that we did back then were in that range. Secondly, during the fiscal year 13-14 budget process, the line item for park and open space facility maintenance was eliminated, and it was discussed at that time that when this sale took place, that funding would be replaced by the proceeds from this. Our concern is that line item covers open space tree work, greenway maintenance, playground maintenance, and repairs, all of which are areas that are heavily used by the public and thus create a safety concern. The fund should provide funding for this work on an annual basis until it's replaced in the operating budget.
So this is a reoccurring cost that happens.
That's correct.
Every year?
That's correct.
And 35s?
Now, I should say, let me go back. 10 of that was put back in. 10 of the 35 was put back in into this operating budget. It was not in 13-14, but it is in 14-15. But that
10's already in there.
10 is in.
So new
it was
would
aimed
be
primarily
25 new.
Yeah, it was aimed primarily at trail maintenance. Our concern is there's still not the funding for the open space maintenance of the 2,900 or so acres that we're responsible, and the town is responsible for.
You're talking about mowing grass and stuff like that, things like that?
More tree work. It's more tree work. Unfortunately, a lot of our open space areas are within subdivisions. They're in not visible areas, so we have dumping problems, we have vandalism problems, we have, and we have, a lot of tree wear. A lot of trees that are, a lot of these parcels are, when they're in subdivisions, are adjacent to homeowners. We're often called upon and asked to evaluate trees that may be hazardous to abutting homeowners. So that's probably the majority of it. And finally, as Jeff mentioned, the town's now in the process of making the final payment on the Ethel Walker parcel. Certainly creates a tremendous opportunity for the town. With that comes a number of areas of concern with both short and long-term maintenance, including signage, trail maintenance, nuisance tree removal, parking area maintenance, trail and site identification, and some education informational brochures that detail the property. We've worked on a transition plan, and I'll ask Jeff to talk a little bit about it, but it's really based on some of the concerns that came up specifically about the property, and I'll just run through them briefly. To put in place a short and long-term improvement plan to identify funding requirements, coordinate the effort with the forest management plan that's now underway, review our conservation easements within the Ethel Walker Agreement for use limitations in the context of the improvement plan, discussion with our major stakeholders, Simsbury Land Trust, McLean Game Refuge, Keep the Woods Group, as well as our abutting neighbors. The plan should also address trail mapping, signage, educational materials and informational brochures, as well as short and long-term improvements with cost and schedule for trail improvements, informational kiosks, security, drainage improvements, stream crossing, parking improvements, as well as outdoor classroom. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to talk a little bit about where we are on that transition plan. Yes.
Yeah, I have a few questions too. Go ahead.
I just want to go back to the $6,000 that it takes to start harvesting the trees. I didn't quite understand that.
That's
usually
the cost
you make money on this.
Yeah, what we asked the consulting harvester, or I'm sorry, the consulting forester to do, is part of the preparing that bid package is to go out. He actually has to go out and inventory really every tree that is going to be available to be harvested or included in that harvest. So there's his time with that. There's his time with the doing the walkthrough for any timber harvesters who would be hopefully interested in it. There would be.
So this is before you go out.
It's before it goes out to bid.
Bid. Okay,
right.
I see. So it's a one-time cost.
It's a one-time, and then from that point on, everything would be self-sustaining.
And just to give some background, town, we used to do this maybe about 10 years ago, longer.
Oh, longer, yeah.
16 years. And we used to do this where we brought in foresters because you can't just go in and clear cut.
Right. Oh, for sure.
Clear cut areas, but we, for some reason, the town stopped doing it, and so we want to restart it. And there's some revenue that can be generated. It's not as much as it used to be because of demands for wood and some other issues, but it does generate revenue, and it does protect the forest, and there is an education component. We had a recent walk and site visit with McLean over at McLean Game Refuge and Steve Payne, and they do the same process at McLean's, but it is an education process because the public doesn't understand why you're clearing certain parcels. That's why it has to be done professionally and has to be identified.
Then I had a question about all the different land parcels and how we prioritize where to do work and actually even which parcels to keep. And I know we have an open space committee, and I have to confess I don't know everything that they do. So I'm assuming they've done some of this work. But can you talk a little bit about whether and what the plan is like, whether there is a plan to look at sort of prioritizing these
Sure.
parcels and what work needs to be done? And
basically, and we've taken and we've looked at a spreadsheet that we've put together internally of the vast majority of those parcels, and we've tried to classify those roughly A, B, and C. And basically, that's really in the order of the the use by the public, the potential, obviously, for, are the safety concerns. When you look at areas that have, a lot of these areas do have very well-developed trails. So we do try and devote, more of our attention, our in-house efforts to that. But within that whole, even with the lower priority areas, many of them may be as small as an acre, maybe less than an acre, that may be abutting a landowner or, a property owner. And that's where we get called in on many occasions to take a look at what they perceive. They may look at and say, I think there's a tree that is, encroaching on my property. It's not healthy. It doesn't look healthy. I'm worried it's going to, it's going to fall on my property. And that's where we come out, try and make an evaluation, and in most cases bring in a contractor, a tree, contractor to do it. We don't have the ability to do it in-house. So I'm just talking about a little bit, what we do internally and with staff in terms of the higher priority areas that are more heavily used by the public. At the same time, still have that responsibility for the parcels that are adjacent to.
And that's actually the second part of my question is, have we prioritized which parcels we truly want to keep? Because if the town happens to own a half an acre of sort of captive land next to somebody else that we're responsible for paying to do things,
right,
but there's no real public access, there's no real use for the land, why don't we sell it or even give it to the adjacent landowner and unload that responsibility?
Sounds like you were at our last meeting of the Open Space Committee.
Oh.
So just to add to what Jerry said, and Helen Peterson's here from the Open Space Committee, that's exactly what the Open Space Committee is doing.
Yes.
We finally, for the first time, had categorized. Now again, open space was really considered part of a Parks and Rec function, and I think that's what Parks and Rec is wrestling with. It's no longer part of that function. It's its own entity. With 2,900 acres, it's now become its own entity, and we have to have a better management plan is how we deal with that. So the Open Space Committee has focused on a couple things. One was categorizing all the open space that we own, and then mapping all the open space that we own. Everything from open space that the Planning Commission requires, part of subdivision, things that we mow that we no longer want. And then the Open Space Committee is also asking for us to map it, so we did do that. Now they want to prioritize which parcels need to be protected long-term and whether there's certain additional conservation restrictions that can be placed on that. One of the requests that this Open Space Fund would go toward is putting this information on software package. Because right now it's on hard copy Excel spreadsheets. So we need to do the same thing that we have done in our paving management plan, which is to take all of our open space, to categorize it, to prioritize it, and to come up with an annual operating cost. That's why we don't have an annual operating cost of Board of Selectmen, because we don't know what it costs us. And we don't know at what level we want to manage some of our open space areas. So we need help with that. It's become overwhelming. We need a software plan. We need to put it on a plan. We need some help with that. But that's where we're going, and we do have it mapped. We do have it categorized. And what the Open Space Committee will be saying is some recommendations to start disposing of land that we know we don't want. Great. Selling it off. Yep. And that's why the use of the Open Space Fund is so important, because it incentivizes us to sell off open space and then use those funds to maintain other open space.
Great.
So that's what.
But the plan you're going to talk about tonight is the Ethel Walker open space plan that you're working on now.
Right. So what you just saw here, what we just outlined, and what the Board of Selectmen received, is all of the issues that we identified before the town takes ownership of that final piece. Mm-hmm. Because once we take ownership, we now have to offer this available to the public, invite the public in. We did a site walk of the land. A lot of the, that's where we started getting nervous, because a lot of the land is not in trail-ready condition. There's, so we would need some trail signage. We also took a look at all the restrictions, the legal documents and the restrictions on land, and there are some issues with allowing horses on the property, which is required under the deed and the sale. We currently have ordinances prohibiting horses on trails, so we've got to identify some legal issues with regard to honoring the contract documents and changing our town ordinances. We met with McLean, and they have some areas where horses and people mix, and they've done a great job with signage, so we know we're going to need some money to identify some signage, weight-bearing, directional signage, permanent signage. One of the areas we identified was that there's no public access right now, so once we take ownership of it, where are people going to park? They're going to pull into Bushy Hill and park at Ethel Walker, where there are kids and horses, and the public access is really right off of Bushy Hill, right through the horse barn. So we really identified some practical issues with taking ownership of land.
Mary, there is access off Town Farm Road, though, isn't there?
There is some access off Town Forest, but it's not signed, and it's not, would need to be upgraded. So once we identified some of the issues, and again, if you could look at the list that we had on our agendas, you know, we have a lot of issues that we were brainstorming, and that is that there's a lot of stakeholders that we'd like to have conversations with. The land trust, McLean, Keep the Woods, the neighbors, about how we want to use this property, where we want to access the public. We need maps about where it is. We need to identify access and parking. We need to identify signage, directional signage, interpretive signage, warning signs, again, to deal with the horse and the pedestrian issues. We need some short and long-term improvements. Immediately, there needs to be some drainage issues, some security issues, some stream crossings that we need to identify, some parking. We've had discussions with private schools and public schools about outdoor classrooms and how we want to use it to as an educational component. We raised other issues such as what's the name of this piece of land going to be called? The town owns it. Now what are we going to call it? Can we accept gifts? Do we have a policy to accept gifts, so if folks want to donate to whatever we decide to call it? Can they donate to the stewardship fund? How do we deal with liability, emergency management plans, and are there other grants and revenue sources we can go after that will help offset the cost of all of our open space, but in particular this piece here. The land trust is, just for some comparisons, the land trust is trying to raise between $500 and $1 million, based on a conversation we had today with land trust, to generate about $30,000 to $40,000 a year to maintain 1,000 acres of open space. That's what they estimate. McLean spends about $230,000 a year to maintain 4,900 acres of open space. So that's the range that, you know, that currently is being budgeted to just take care of the land.
Is the land trust aiming at just the properties that they own? And
yes, but we are also having conversations about joint. There's an interest on the town's part in the land trust to work together with McLean to manage, but no one's at that point yet where we know what we need.
Would you come back to the liability issue for a moment? Is it different on the Ethel Walker parcel than, say, any of the other trails and so forth, or land that the town owns?
It's different in a couple ways. One, there's horses on this parcel that we don't have anywhere else.
Okay.
So that raises an important issue right away. We need to address some of the issues that we've seen right away, where we have done in other areas. We have signage. We don't have signage here. We have access in other places that we don't have here. So there's some, and the other thing, the symbolic taking over of the property from Ethel Walker, certain things need to be done. It's going to be important that the town take over ownership, not just, you know, buy it and then let it be used by the school the way it's being used, because it's now the town land. So I think there's a perception that, you know, if we didn't take on some of these issues, that, you know, the school would continue to use it the way they've used it, but the town wouldn't have public access.
Peter, let me follow up with a question. Joe, do you know whether Kerma is aware of the acquisition?
No, they're not.
They're not aware.
Well, they're aware of what we bought already, but we haven't closed yet.
Yeah,
We won't
sorry.
close until November.
Yeah.
So we're working with Kerma and that's why we identified, we went through all of the easement documents and the contract documents to pull out any issues of concern. That's where we identified.
We're constantly trying to update them on liability
Right.
issues, and that's
Yes,
certainly.
and that's why we identified the no horses ordinance versus the requirement to have horses that we identified as an issue.
Mary, did I read that for the horse trails, Ethel Walker has to contribute? Maybe
There's
no
language, I have the
overload.
legal documents, and we're trying to get clarification as to what that means.
I mean, it talks about, we do walking trails, but if they want to do horse trails, do they have to participate in that?
The
Did I read that
documents
right?
are not clear as to what that means. So we'd like to be good neighbors, so we'd like to have some conversations about what their roles are, what our roles are.
Peter, my question is right in that line. On that same memo, I think we're referring to the Rich Sawicki memo, May 20th. There's also reference, which wasn't clear at all, and I'm wondering if you could shed a little light on it, around state limitations, and that we can't improve, we shall manage and maintain the property such that natural, scenic, forest, and/or open space conditions are not improved. And so I was wondering how that fit with adding parking and some of the other conversations. I don't know how broad that restriction is.
That's what we're trying to get clarification. What we did, I think you're reading a summary of a memo that we took all the easement documents and all the contract documents, and we went through them with a fine-tooth comb to raise issues that we would need to deal with. And that resulted in the May 20th memo that I think you're referring to, Barbara. So we haven't done anything more with this document to get clarification. There are issues that you're raising that need to be clarified, and that will require us to bring counsel in and to have those clarifications. We haven't done that. We just identified the issues at this point. But you'll see under the documents it says the town shall maintain trails and forests through forest management plan. So that's what we're trying to do with the Malone McBroom study so that we can have a plan. We don't have one right now. The town is required, it seems from our interpretation that we have to provide routine trail maintenance. I think it gets back to the question raised earlier in the school, is to provide additional maintenance for equestrian use, but we don't really know what that means in terms of dollars, in terms of contributions.
Just as an overview, I think what we're trying to do tonight is get an understanding of what the town sees they're trying to do, put it all into one spot, or decide how they're going to tackle it with a long-range plan. Give us some numbers so we get some sense of, from our board standpoint, we have to work with them on what fund to use, the funding, how does that all work. So we're trying to just, understand what it is, and how big it is, as they describe it to us and where it's going, and then try to get a handle for funding sources or how it can work to go through the nuts and bolts of the financing of it. So
Exactly.
I think that's why I want us to keep our focus.
And I think when we saw the issues that were raised just with the acquisition of this parcel, that's when we brought it to the Board of Selectmen and said, help, we can't do this in-house. We really need to do something a little more before we close on the parcel.
But it seems like a long-range plan. There's a lot of pieces here. There's a lot going on. So it's not something that's going to happen in the next week or two. This is going to take a while.
I know you've already read this, but my plain reading of the language is that Ethel Walker is on the hook. It says Ethel Walker will maintain equestrian equipment and cross-country course at its cost, and the school is to provide additional maintenance for its equestrian use. So I guess the question in my mind is, can we interpret that to say that horses are allowed for Ethel Walker because that's in their covenant? They didn't say horses in general are allowed. It's really about Ethel Walker's horses. And they're supposed to pay the cost for their horse trail.
You're right, and that's what we're trying to clarify, but in practicality, what does that mean and what level? They may think maintenance, we're trying to be good neighbors, so we need to have a conversation, a memorandum of understanding about what that means, and that's what we'd like to work on. So we'd like to, because it's our property and it's our liability, we need to decide what level of maintenance it needs to be maintained at. So that may be at a higher level than they want to contribute. So all I'm saying is that it's not as clear. It's clear in the documents, it's not clear what the dollars are going to be. So we want to have those conversations before we close so that we understand what's required of us, what's required of them, whether there's going to be an annual contribution and we do the work, or whether they're going to do the work to our specifications and our requirements, because we do have insurance liability and risk. So all those issues need to be addressed.
Yeah.
Were you gonna continue on as far as the plan? Any-
Open it up to
I was gonna turn it over to Jeff just to talk a little bit about where we are with the, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
to talk a little bit more.
Yeah, so-
I mean, we're gonna just take your questions, we'll just let them keep going, because, you know, we got another half hour to go, so we gotta keep things moving, so we'll constantly have questions, I'm sure, but.
Sure, so as Mary had said, after, you know, we did the site walk and we met internally, with the complications with the shared use and what have you, we felt we needed to reach out to somebody to get some help. So we solicited a proposal from a professional planning and engineering firm, Malone and McBroom, who has history on the property. They've done significant amount of investigatory work for prior developments that were being considered on that property. They also completed the property surveys for the prior acquisitions, and frankly felt pretty comfortable with their ability to help us in terms of preparing a improvement plan for the property. We also felt it was a good opportunity, again, given the larger open space planning issue in town, to kind of maybe learn from going through this process and maybe being able to do some of this on our own in a more articulate fashion in the future. So essentially what we asked them to do is to scope a project to do an existing condition survey of the property, looking at all the habitat issues, the valuable resources, the things we'd want to protect, the existing trail system, the whole shared use of the equestrian and the hiker issue. Could that potentially be separated through some very simple trail modifications? The improvements that would be required. Again, existing conditions plan, looking at the environmental issues, and the second step being a short and long-term improvement plan, and also a maintenance plan long-term, what needs to be done on an annual basis, what do we need to check, what those costs may be, what those activities would be, so that we have a better idea of what we need to do. So again, looking at this thing internally, we thought it was too large, there was too many needs, the costs were uncertain, so we felt this was the best approach to kind of have a plan going forward that was
Did you
logical.
consider going out to bid on this proposal?
We did not go out to bid on this again. Essentially, we identified Malone and McBroom based on their prior work on the property. They also have done other work for Ethel Walker. They developed the plans and specs and did the construction management for their synthetic turf field. So they do have relationships with Ethel Walker. We felt that might be of some benefit to the town, just to have discussions. So there was a lot of positives for selecting them based on our discussion.
This letter we have, this is back to you with their scope of work, what they tend to do, and the fees for it?
That's correct.
So does everyone have a copy of that? I think it's at the end, the $30,000 they're gonna do, what you've talked about?
That's correct.
And then plus $3,000 for other incidental costs, so
That's right.
33 is what the math is, or what somebody be looking for?
That is a solid number, yes.
Okay.
So, Mary, can I just add, do we have a policy around going out to bid for
We did talk about this with the
services?
finance director, because this is a unique parcel. I mean, we didn't know, as Jeff said, once we realized this was too big for us to do in-house, we didn't know if it would cost $5,000 or $100,000 to do a scope of services. But given that Malone McBroom had done work on the property already in the past for Ethel Walker and previously, we thought that would be the right route to go to get an estimate. We can go out to bid. We checked with our finance director. This consulting services didn't have to go out to bid, so that's why we brought it here. You know, it's up to the boards whether they want to go out to bid. We can certainly do that. But you know, there's a question as to whether that is in the town's best interest. We already have somebody who's familiar with the property.
Is timing an issue?
Timing is not an issue, and it is. I mean, we are closing probably in November, so we want to be ready to go when we close. So I don't know how much time it would take to put the bid out and wait for it to come back. I don't know, Nick. I could find out and Joe.
I wasn't thinking so much that, but the whole package that you're. I mean, you're talking about a lot of
Pieces.
moving parts here.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
I was going to ask whether Ethel Walker has provided us with whatever it is that whatever work was performed for them, or if we can, as part of the negotiations?
We do have it. We have the work that was done on previous development.
Yeah, we will benefit from all that prior work. I mean, wetlands were flagged in detail, topography was flown, we got boundary. It's worth a lot of money in terms of a starting point.
Its starting point, is it like dated by 4 or 5 years, or?
It is. I don't think there's any significant changes that have occurred there that would affect what we're doing.
We thought that's why the proposal came in as low as it did, because there's already familiarity with the site.
Right.
Just a final, go ahead.
Are there any plans to hold a public hearing on all of this at some point?
So, well, there's a couple things. If I just finish the last pieces, we want to involve the public. We want to have as much discussion, but we need something to talk about. So we would need to have a plan in place so that we could discuss and roll out so people could comment. Right now, we have the map of the open space and a lot of needs. We did identify in the open space committee, it's in your packet, did identify a number of revenue sources, so that's just something for you to consider as we talk about using the open space fund that's already in place. Jerry talked earlier about the forest management plan and funding that would come from there. The open space committee is identifying the sale of open space parcels that Linda talked about earlier that we may not feel are as important as other pieces, or may not feel are as important as stewardship. Small neighborhood parcels, certainly there's a lot of interest in disposing of those because they do nothing but give us headaches. The naming policy for RFP for the acquisition of Ethel Walker, we don't know what we're going to call it. If someone's interested in calling it something and could generate some revenue, that's a possibility. Creation of a gift policy. Right now we don't have a gift policy to receive donations to the Open Space Special Revenue Fund, so we'd really like to be able to have people give a gift to protect the woods and have it earmarked to go to specific things. Once there's a plan and we identify benches, there'll be also all sorts of ways for people to get involved and be involved in contributing in whatever possible way and helping offset the costs. Increased events. We saw the tremendous success of the triathlon, so thanks to Linda. A lot of these parcels, if they're done right, they could be really great opportunities to hold events, and we've seen they generate a tremendous amount of revenue, but you got to make sure that they're safe and that there's proper parking and proper access, so that's another possibility. And once we have a plan, an open space plan, we can take that plan and go to the Hartford Foundation and other places for stewardship funds. We don't have a plan right now, so it's hard to go to fill out a grant application and say, we have all this land, we need help, mowing the grass. But if we can show a detailed amount and a plan of how we're going to, how much we have to generate, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to protect the vernal pools, what it costs on an annual basis to do that, then we put ourselves in a very good place to get those grants.
Do you have an estimate now? I mean, one of the days we're going to get down the money, what you need. I mean, I've seen a lot of figures. I did my own money.
And thank you, Peter, for asking. We didn't put a budget together to the Board of Selectmen. We didn't have a budget, and we anticipated a meeting, but I heard that you wanted some numbers, so we do have some numbers, and thanks to Joe, we did put some numbers together, and I'll pass this out.
And give us something to think about. I mean, we got to reformulate in our minds what we're trying to do here. I mean, the way we think is short-term and long-term.
Yeah.
And basically, short-term is more operating budget needs, long-term are different needs and funds.
So, as a preliminary, we thought that the reason that the Open Space Committee made this request and the Conservation Committee endorsed it is because I think it was significant that the town made a decision to preserve the Farrell's Farm but not maintain it, not own it. So the sale of Farrell's Farm provided us a great opportunity to sell off a parcel of land that we didn't think was a priority and use the funds for stewardship. So that seemed like the perfect parcel to start the conversation. That's why the request from the Open Space Committee mirrored the sale of Farrell's Farm. So it's not a surprise that the reason we started having this conversation is because we thought that the money from the sale of Farrell's Farm should go into the Open Space Fund and then put a budget together. Some of the short-term things that we identified were, first of all, the Ethel Walker Consulting Services. We think that before we final close on the final parcel, we really need a plan for this very unique, substantial piece of land, 460 acres, and a real plan from the beginning of how we're going to use it, a public conversation about how we're going to use it, where the public's going to access, access, how we're going to keep the public safe. That's the $33,000 figure. We think that there's about $100,000 that we're going to need for improvements. That's some drainage, some signage, some parking lot improvements. That's probably...
That will come out of that plan, though, once
Yeah.
they do the plan.
Once
you'll
the
have
plan,
a firmer
right.
number there.
We don't know, again, what's that based on? It's based on our walkthrough. It was designed to just give you a sense of how much work there's going to need to be done. The Belden Forest repairs, that was with the Veterans Memorial, there's a lot more interest in the library. The Belden Forest repairs, that's the land behind the library that just needs tree cutting and clearing. That was not budgeted for because it wasn't identified as an open space
That was in
need.
Jerry's
That was in
memo
Jerry's
that we
memo,
didn't
right.
quite get to, but that's...
The Parks and Rec Open Space Management Plan, we identified that if we put all of the information that we have right now on a GIS system and create a software plan, we could do that with that amount of money. The short-term repairs, that was what Jerry's saying, that's additional tree work and trail clearing. Thanks to the Board of Selectmen, we did put more money into trail maintenance this year, but we think that there's still more need. The bike trail maintenance plan, that's a huge issue because the bike trail is now over 20 years old. We don't have a plan as to how, like we do a paving management plan, how many miles of bike trail need to be repaved after so many years. We could put that in our capital non-recurring plan and our budget once we knew the annual operating costs, but again, we always guess. And so we'd like a real formal number, so that would be a software package that would help put that in place. The bike trail short-term repairs, that's for the railings, again, the route work, some of the things that Jerry's identified. The trail short-term repairs, those really were just as a guess as to how much it would cost to maintain some of the other areas. And then if the town, once we identified what our needs were and what our plan was, our Public Works Director thought that if we could have some equipment funds, that we could actually buy some of this equipment in-house and start to maintain some of that in-house. But again, that's just an estimate. Some of these things we know are real numbers, and some of these were just designed to give you a sense of how staff might see the budget. So don't hold us to this line item by line item, but it was just a guide.
Right. What I'd like to do is, we see this, and some of these things are hard, some are not. Maybe we can talk about methods of fundings, as far as, Joe, you can kind of give us what we have set up, what we can do. We can talk about our budget process and what we like to do or don't like to do with money and where it comes from. So just kind of...
I mean, there's definitely a lot that you can do.
Yeah.
For right now, if you guys wanted to put funding aside, you could set money aside from your general fund reserve into a special revenue fund, which would be a multi-year account. You'd have to figure out ways to make the special revenue fund generate some revenue, and I think you heard a couple of ideas that Mary gave out.
Go back, you said special revenue fund. Let's go back to what we have now. We have an open space fund, right? What is that? What do we call it? I hate to get technical here,
That's
but
a special revenue fund. I can give
is
you
it special revenue?
I'm 99% positive it's special revenue, but I know
So
from
we're
the best
never-
questions.
Never funded. There were
Right.
requests to fund it in the past, but they were not successful, so there's no funding in it.
Yeah, there was money in it at one point in time back in the mid-90s. I don't even think it's showing up in the audit, but it's still out there.
But some of the considerations are, if we do capital purchases and we're gonna put money in from land sales for capital acquisition, I'm not sure special revenue fund's the fund we have to use. I think, no, that's just a technical.
We could figure out the accounting behind it. You could receive it in the general fund and then create an appropriation
Yeah.
or something to that effect, but we could definitely figure it out. Outside of appropriating through the fund balance, doing so during the budgeting process, or creating revenue streams for the special revenue fund, I think the only other options you really have would be borrowing, but I don't think that you guys are really looking at something
Typically a
like that.
special revenue, like Simsbury Farms, has its own revenue source. So if we get into a plan where you have sale of timber, do you want to run it through the general fund, or you want to set up into a fund like this?
Yeah.
But on the expenditure side, I assume we'd want some controls, like Simsbury Farms comes back through the budget process. So you just don't put the money in here and say, go spend it. Obviously, it has to come back through.
I think we ought to look at some of the things we're already doing. I mean, why is the sale of timber much different from the sale of sand that we've already got. I mean,
Right, we didn't set that up.
but my point is, I mean, you know, we've got.
We voted against that one.
We wanted to come back with controls, that was our.
Yeah, but my point is,
Objection.
we've got assets
Right.
like that from time to time we want to sell, and I don't think we should be creating different ways of handling them. We ought to be looking to have something that's, you know, comprehensive and provide some continuity and, you know.
What vehicle can best facilitate the collaborative effort that Mary has talked about? If we're thinking about some partnership with the Simsbury Land Trust, for example, if we're thinking about donations, hopefully people are using the trails. I'm hoping we're going to be getting donations. Hopefully we're not talking about providing horse trails for everybody, anybody, but only with that little walker. I don't think the town wants to get into business unless through public discourse there's some clear mandate from the public they want to maintain horse trails to the general public. I just don't think we ought to be going down that route, but I would think that we want to pick the best vehicle, and I don't know if that's a special revenue fund. I don't know if people who donate, if they are fundraisers, if, you know, what's the best vehicle for achieving that?
I just would add, I think that's a really good question, because people don't donate to general funds.
Right.
They only donate if they know specifically what the money's going to be.
We did the performing arts and
Sure, on the
set up
Board
a special nonprofit, special fund for that donation.
The towns
Initially,
the
yeah.
towns receive gifts
Right.
over and over again over the long term. I mean, whether it be the Performing Arts Center or the McGowan gift or whatever. I mean, what I hate to see is us doing things differently every time one of these things comes along. We ought to have a more or less consistent policy on how we handle it.
But we do
This is
let
unusual,
people
though.
identify specific gifts for specific
Sure.
purposes. So the gifts that go to social services, those are earmarked, and those do go into a special fund for social services. So, you know, I know you're talking about the mechanics of, and we can provide some history. I think the point is that if you don't have a special place that open space funds can be put into, then folks won't feel comfortable donating. And that's what we're trying to create.
And we want to encourage it.
We have to list our own issues and what we see the financial issues are. I mean, you're gonna get contributions as an issue. Sale of land is an issue. Can you earmark that into a fund, or how does it work procedurally? If we sell timber, how do we want to set the policy? So what we should probably do is get our own list of issues that we see financially, set a consistent policy, and make sure, see how it works. We're an oversight board, so I would assume we want to retain on the expenditure side, as things come back through, the voters, I know per charter, have to vote on any land purchase. So if we're gonna swap land or do anything like that, we have to do that, but on the sale of land, I don't believe that has to go through the voters. So the Board of Selectmen can sell land. Right now, it would just go into the general fund, the surplus, that's what happens. So if we want to say, gee, if you sell this type of land, can we now earmark the proceeds? What has to happen is our board has to say, okay, we'll take X dollars and put it over here for you. We don't have the mechanism in place to do that. I think that's what they're asking us, to get a mechanism of how that all's going to work. So I think from our standpoint, we have to think about that, you know, and in our minds, what should go over to that fund, and then how does the authorization for expenditure happen? And it's that simple, but I mean, that's what we have to think about. So that's why I wanted Mary just to kind of talk about the need, what they're looking to get, so we can kind of understand it, see what, you know, there are some operating needs, I see some capital needs, land acquisition needs, I see a variety of needs here. So there's many ways we can meet these needs, but we got to now think about, do our part, how does it fit?
And I guess I would say, you know, in terms of selling the land and having the money come back, I would again submit that the Open Space Committee is not going to be terribly incentivized to sell off those low priority parcels if the money is just going to go into the general fund, and then we may or may not decide to put that money towards open space preservation. Whereas if it's more clearly, excuse me?
Please, we're just...
Please not interrupt.
I apologize.
You know, you know, if there's an incentive for them to feel like, you know, the money's going to go for the thing that they care.
But Linda, I mean, with that same thing, we do that, and let's say they sell $200,000 piece of land, that's fine. All of a sudden, they say, 10 years from now, we're gonna sell 300 acres of this, so you're talking $10 million.
Yeah.
Do you want
I get
that, you know, so we, you know, a lot of things can happen.
I guess I'm thinking about the voters and the people voted in our town to acquire this land, and so I'm thinking that it was town mandate, so to speak. The vote, I don't believe, was even close. That we acquired the land, and then I think whatever we're able to get out of the land, we probably want to try very carefully to put it toward the management of this so that it's not an additional burden, short of turning over the land, you know, donating it if they would accept it to the Simsbury Land Trust, you know, under some kind of a deed where they would maintain this as trails for the benefit of the town. I think the hope is that we can minimize the burden on taxpayers. So, but it's going to be a long-term commitment. So I think we do have significant interest in the community for maintaining these kinds of trails. I think there are fundraising opportunities and the like that if we can establish something, I don't know if it's a nonprofit or something where people feel comfortable they can donate the money to, I think we should try to minimize the future liability to the town of maintaining this.
The one thing we have to keep in mind is that there's requests and letters that everyone says, we sold Farrell's Farm for X dollars, transfer it over here. If we're gonna do something, we have to think, are we gonna do that? Are we gonna transfer a certain dollar amount? You know, eventually, something has to happen. You know, eventually we have to come to a mind, we're gonna transfer zero, we're gonna transfer a certain amount, all of it. So we have to think about that. I don't think tonight we're gonna decide that, but that's something we have to think about.
But when are we gonna
Right.
decide that?
I don't think we're here tonight to decide it. I think a high-level overview of what the needs are. I think if, this board is an oversight board, and I think we need to remember that these now are policy. You've given us sort of the overview of, and hopefully you will go back now, right, and make policy decisions about how best to tackle all these needs and present more concrete numbers, more concrete needs as you go through your process, and then this board try to figure out what's the best way to fund it, retaining some controls and quality assurance and risk management principles in place to minimize the impact on the taxpayers.
What I'm hearing, though, I think, just based on listening to urgencies and timetables, I would assume within the next month or so, we have to talk about future actions, but I would assume we'd want to transfer something to get it going, otherwise they can't come back with certain information.
Right.
So I think.
Something.
So, and that was exactly, Peter, I think, and I think more, Peter,
something has to happen
you all raised
month or so.
right. So we're not looking for a vote tonight
Right.
on, you know, a lot of issues. What we wanted to do and what the Board of Selectmen had asked for this joint meeting for is to have consensus that this is important, that we're at a transition in our community at our time of having a significant amount of open space. I think the reason Parks and Rec are here, because we used to treat it, we have the same number of staff doing our open space management as we did when we had you know, half the amount of acres that we have. So we obviously are wrestling with something that we don't really know yet. You know, we don't know what the annual operating costs of maintaining the trails at a certain level are that we can put in our operating budget. So we understand that there's pieces. I think tonight the point was, is this important to us as a community? Is there support to come back at the next Board of Selectmen meeting and talk about some of the short-term monetary requests to get this started with the ability to put some longer-term plans in place? And is there support from the Board of Finance if the Board of Selectmen does send a request for funding? Is it likely to be, you know, we don't want to waste everybody's time. Is it likely to get support?
Speaking for myself, you know, people always think everybody moves to Simsbury because of the school system, and I know lots of people, myself included, didn't move here for the school system. We moved here for the open space and the outdoor parks and the great recreational opportunities here in town. So I feel very strongly that this is something that we should do and that I support, so much so that I am comfortable making a decision tonight, if everybody wants to do it, to at least give you the money to get started. I mean, you may not want to do the whole shebang, but you know, we do want to move forward with seeking plans and getting some action, and I'm not sure what there is to be gained by waiting another month, unless you need a month in order to even figure out what you'd ask us for as an initial.
No, I mean, this is a joint meeting of the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance, so, I mean, feel free to, we know what we need short-term. And I think that's what we've outlined. We at least need the Malone McBroom money. We'd like to get some of the Belden Forest money, some of the software money, so that we can start those long-term plans, so we can figure out by next year budget how much actually has to go in the operating budget versus other budgets.
So
I think what she's looking for from us is, when she comes back with a number, an exact number, they start the transfer process.
Yeah,
So we'd have to,
Yeah, I'm comfortable making a proposal to say, we take that
I don't
number.
think we can. I don't think we put it in there
You mean?
by the agenda.
It's not by our agenda?
Can't can't amend the agenda.
No, not for a special meeting, no.
At our next meeting, we can talk about it again, but traditionally, like all the requests, even our next meeting starts from the
I
Board of
see.
Selectmen to come to our meeting. They have not formally made a request to us.
Okay.
So I think they're just asking to take the temperature of our board, and that's what I'm trying to do right now, if we could.
Well,
So if we could just, wait a minute.
Our next meeting starts in 3 minutes.
I know, that's why we gotta take the temperature real quick.
I'm clearly in support.
Yeah.
I was just gonna recommend we could add to the possible revenue sources. You see those signs along the highway that talk about this portion of the highway maintained by a certain business. I'm thinking maybe this portion of the trail maintained by a certain business is another opportunity. We've got a lot of wonderful merchants in town who might want to.
Mary, I just wanted to add a comment. We did a marketing study in the last year, and Simsbury strategies. And one of the things they highlighted is this open space is not just lovely; it's an economic driver for the town of Simsbury, and that's what will attract high technology companies. They're looking for quality of life. And so it's not just something we want to do, although we do love it. It's also an economic driver, and the marketing study made that clear, that we need to look at this not as just recreation, but as an economic driver.
Barb, do you have any thoughts?
I'm supportive, but I'm not ready to vote for $500,000 right now. But I think if they come back with a tighter number, right, and I don't know what that number is.
Yeah, but this memo's got about $55,000 worth of suggested spending in it, and I don't know why we couldn't take that up and on next
So
meeting.
be your supporter?
Yes, I am.
Laura?
I am. I don't know what the number is.
I'm supportive of it. I put an amount over there if you came back to us. I think if your board came back and said we need whatever you need to get it
What's your
going.
number?
I work off reserves, so, right now, you gotta remember, we spent a lot of money. We spent.
Yeah, and I think it's great, and I think the Board of Selectmen has been very supportive, and we're the Open Space Committee, and Conservation, and Parks and Rec, and just in terms of numbers, so there are some firm numbers in there. The Malone McBroom study, that's the number. Those software packages, that's the number. The Belden Forest, that's the number. The forest management plan that Jerry is asking for funding for $6,000, which will then identify what areas we can clear cut, that is the number. So it'll, the rest of the numbers, and definitely some funding for Ethel Walker. Now, how much we need, we don't know, because we have to get in there once we own it. But, so if you're asking what is the number short-term, those would be the line items that we should pay attention to, and we'll formulate those when we go to the Board of
Bring it to
Selectmen.
us to what, short-term you need X now, and then long-term you're gonna probably need a range, so we can either give you the whole thing, decide the whole thing, or at least the short-term piece. I have no problem.
Okay.
We'll eventually get there, it's just a question of
No,
when.
I think it's great. And I just want to give the Board of Selectmen an opportunity to comment, or the open space or Parks and Rec, if anyone wanted to add anything that wasn't covered.
Just from a mechanism standpoint, we'll obviously address this, you guys all hit it right, because we need to talk about is A, putting money in the open space fund, and then B, coming back during the budgetary process and very early on, like November, October-ish, talking about what goes in operating as well, because we can't get into the Simsbury Farms issue we have where, oops, in 3 years it's empty again, what do we do now? So, that's going to be a part of this, and how do we kind of merge that in as we're talking about with, fixing the Simsbury Farms issues and recreation becoming a much bigger focus in this town than I think we've traditionally had, so. And then again, I don't know what the funding mechanism, Joe, for the open space fund, who can appropriate funds out of there at this point, but that might be.
You guys would address it by policy, just like every other fund.
But who can now? I guess somebody can spend the money out of the account now, right?
There's technically nothing in there. So
Let's
once you fund
say
it-
$32,000 showed up in that
I
account
think it has to
tonight.
go Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance. It has to follow the same.
If it comes back like Simsbury Farms and even goes to the voters, that would be ideal.
Yeah, no, I think it's ultimately, at the end of the day, it's what level do you want to maintain your open space, how do you want to use it, and how much are you going to fund it? And that's, you know, that's really up to the taxpayer.
As far as the site walk, are you lining up a site walk?
So
for us?
we thought it was really important that many folks probably haven't been there, and we'd like to do a site walk. If there was interest, we would like to know that and some availability. So if the boards are interested, we'd like to coordinate a joint site walk and invite the public in as well.
To have a walker?
Yeah.
So why don't we coordinate through, who should we coordinate through?
So I'll have Joe send out some dates
Yeah.
to both Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and the other boards that are here today. And then once we have a date, we'll post it, and the public's welcome to come as well. I think it'll be, I think it's really significant, so you can see the beauty of the land and also the opportunity for the land and the challenges that we're going to need to address short term. I think that will really, it'll really bring home what it did to us is that we got a lot of work to do, you know, to make sure that we take care of it the way it's supposed to be taken care of.
Mary, just a quick question on the consulting fee. Does this mean we cannot move forward until we get the authorization?
Yes, we can. And I don't know how
Has your
long
board
that will
approved it?
take. Jeff, do you know how long?
It's about a 4-month process, we're estimating with the public input and, you know, the drafts.
Has your board approved that?
No.
No.
So as soon as you approve it, send it out.
Okay. So we have a meeting in August, so it'll be on our August agenda. And then we won't be able to get in there until spring.
Thank you.
We won't be able to.
Maybe some short term,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Do we need to get this done before the acquisition in November? Should we call a special meeting so that you can get started?
This is part of the reason I asked about timing.
Yeah.
Is it, and is there anything we can do in the 6 o'clock meeting coming up?
I think why I asked about putting the money in the open space fund now, so that we can go spend it out of it when we make the decision.
But you still need to come back to the authority.
Depends on what the controls are in place for it, but yeah.
But I think that if I'll defer to Jeff, but if the board so chooses to put $33,000 in the open space fund with the requirement to be paid for with Board of Selectmen approval for that particular purpose, then we could be assured that it won't be spent on other things.
We're going to talk about it in our next
Yeah.
meeting, but we'll probably, I'd rather just come up with a certain sum, not just pick items
Okay.
and say, here it is.
Okay.
Put it, but we want some controls coming back, and then everyone's happy, and, you know.
Okay, and I'll work with staff, I'll have Jeff and Jerry go back and talk to Malone McBroom and see what the time frame is, and see if the board needs a special meeting, then we can call that and
Sure.
send it forward to your next meeting.
All right,
Thank you.
well, thank you for everyone that came, and the information was very informative, so I appreciate it, and the meeting adjourned, special meeting. Thank you. We'll take 1 minute, and then we'll start our 6 o'clock meeting, if we could.
How you doing?
Good, how you doing? Jeff?
Yes. Hand them over. Thank you all.
I don't know why you didn't get any.
Yeah, I don't know what
We always
happened.
do.
My packet didn't come.
Do you need these? Do you think